To say I'm smitten with today's watch would be an understatement. I absolutely love it, but it's not perfect. Hi Last Watchers, today's watch has been sent to me on loan from Swiss-based Nivada Grenchen. Many thanks to Sam for getting in touch with the channel. This is the Broad Arrow Automatic from their Chronomaster Aviator Sea Diver range. A catch-all title that seems to be covering all the bases, but is the Chronomaster a jack of all trades or a master of none? The Nivada name may be new to most of you, but the brand has been around for almost 100 years. They were established in 1926 by Jacob Schneider, a resident of the Grenchen municipality of Switzerland. Nivada were one of the first brands in the 1930s to manufacture an automatic movement, which led to the development of their first waterproof watch, the Antarctic, in 1950. Rather fortuitously, the Antarctic was later adopted in the mid-1950s by members of the US Navy for expeditions to the South Pole. I wonder if Jacob had a crystal ball. Nivada gained a reputation for building tough, reliable watches, a reputation that was cemented further in the 1960s with some breakthrough models. 1963 saw the release of the original Chronomaster, a 200-meter water-resistant chronograph. 1964 introduced the Depth-O-Matic, a diver's watch with a built-in depth indicator. A year later, in 1965, Nivada released the Depth Master, another diver, but this one came with the added capacity to withstand the pressure of 100 atmospheres or 1,000 meters of water resistance. It's fair to say that Nivada were competing with, if not beating, the other big name brands. You know who they are. It wasn't all plain sailing though. A dispute with Movado in the States resulted in an amicable decision, yeah right, which saw Nivada, Switzerland, rebrand their watches with the Nivada Grenchen name. US watches were branded and distributed under the Croton label. It's not uncommon to find a vintage Nivada watch with a combination of either or all of these names on the dial. Nivada's popularity and their sales peaked during the 1960s and mid-70s. Sadly, like so many Swiss brands, they struggled to survive the Quartz Crisis of the late 70s, and production ceased in the 1980s. Gone, but not forgotten. Jump forward a few decades to 2018, and the Nivada brand was acquired by Guillaume Ledet. Apologies if I just massacred the pronunciation. Guillaume has some serious street cred with the likes of Gégé Lecoute and Zenith. He's a heavy hitter in the watch world, and he approached his pal, Remy Chabrat, owner of the Montrichard Group, about plans to relaunch Nivada Grenchen, which they did 2 years later in 2020, just in time for COVID. Hardly ideal. Full disclosure, I've been liking pictures of the Chronomaster on Instagram for quite some time, so when I got an email from Nivada offering me one of their watches for review, the Broad Arrow was an easy choice. Let's dive into the review, starting with the watch's dimensions. Not including the crown and pushers, the case diameter is 38mm. There's a slight overhang on the bezel which takes it out to 38.8mm. The lug width is a rather exact 20mm. There's a deceptive lug-to-lug of only 46.5mm, which isn't as accommodating as it should be. More on that later. The case, which is home to an automatic chronograph, is 14.8mm thick. That includes the crystal. Size for my fairly average 7-inch wrist and -3 links, the case and bracelet weighs in at a little over 137.3 grams. 145.6 grams if you leave all the links in place. The 316L stainless steel case of the Nivada would almost disappear behind the bezel and dial if it wasn't for the projectile strut lugs that seem awkwardly long compared to the watch's diameter. They are, however, historically correct. The case, as proof of its tool watch history, is almost entirely brushed, vertically on the lug tops and horizontally on the top of the mid-case. The lugs benefit from a subtle chamfered polished edge, as does the belly of the lower case. You can see the midcase has been divided into two, with a brushed bridge from lug to lug, fooling you into thinking that the case is slimmer than it appears. The lugs benefit from drilled holes, a must for those of you that like to swap straps on a regular basis. The right side of the case is home to two polished plungers for the chronograph, and a 6.5mm straight null-edge screw-down crown, also polished and engraved with a Nivada logo. A shield with a letter N at its centre. Engaging the plungers needs a reassuring amount of pressure. A solid click lets you know the job is done. The top pusher is your start and stop for the chronograph. The bottom is the reset. It's an easy job to unscrew the crown, not so much with gloves on. There is a noticeable ghost position before you can set the time. I'll come back to that when I talk about the movement. Rethreading the crown takes some practice. The bezel has a flat cupcake look. Its polished coin edge flares out a fraction as it rises. The fitted aluminium insert also climbs a little further on its inward journey. The insert is a gloss black with full 60-minute silver indices, with Arabics every 5 minutes. The only exception being an inverted triangle at the 60-minute or 12 o'clock position. Look more closely, and within the 5-minute markers you will see further Arabics for the hours 1 through to 11, a reminder that this watch is not only a dive watch but also an aviation or pilot's watch. The bezel can be utilised for a second time zone if required. And just to emphasise its use, it's also bidirectional, moving quite freely both clockwise and anti-clockwise. There are no audible clicks, but if you apply slight pressure, you can feel the friction of the spring and gears within. At the centre of the bezel is a beautiful box dome sapphire crystal that you will forgive for adding a good 2mm to the watch's thickness. It's a worthy upgrade to the original plexiglass that keeps the vintage aesthetic. You could spend countless hours looking at this crystal, and when you do, you just may pick out a hint of blue. There's no mention in the specifications, but I'm guessing there is some anti-reflective coating, hopefully on the interior. I'm happy to be corrected. Beneath the sapphire glass is where the real fun starts. There's so much to share here, I'm spoilt for choice. The rehaut is kept clean and clear, but bare metal leads us to the chapter ring that circles the matte black textured dial. A chapter ring with two uses. The exterior is marked with a tachymeter scale, whereas the interior a chronograph. At first glance, it looks like they've been exquisitely printed white onto a black dial. The benefit of macro reveals that the dial would appear to have been pressed and the printing or paint added afterwards. This seems to be true for every element on the dial. It's a technique that brings clarity, precision and dimension, which is much needed on a dial only 28mm in diameter. The baton hour markers are a creamy soft faux patina of painted Swiss luminova. It's tastefully done. I'm a big fan. The 12 o'clock baton, much like an omega, has added indices for orientation, a rather phallic depiction that can't be unseen. Partially cut into the chapter ring are two subdials. Both are decorated with diminishing concentric circles. The 9 o'clock dial is the run in seconds, with 10-second Arabics to the 60 seconds marker. A fine-cut polished sweeping dagger at its heart. The 3 o'clock dial is a 30-minute measure of the elapsed time from the run-in chronograph. You'll notice the first 5-minute segment is painted bright red, with Arabics that count down from 5 to 0. This is a regatta timer, something new to me, but it's essential for sailboat enthusiasts preparing for the start of a race. The long name of the Nivada is starting to make sense. Chronomaster, that would be the tachymeter and chronograph scale, check. Aviator, a bidirectional 12-hour bezel, check. C, a regatta subdial, check. Diver, screw-down crown, water resistance and a 60-minute bezel, check. Hang on, did I say water resistance? Trust me, they're not getting away with that one either. Below the 12 o'clock position is the Nivada Grenchen name. You won't find Croton on any of the new dials. Above the 6 o'clock baton is the watch's designation, Chronomaster Aviator Sea Diver, and below this the letter L and Swiss, which I think points to the Swiss Superluminova rather than to the watch being Swiss made. Something I'm sure that Grenchen should be boasting about. You can draw your own conclusions. The heart of the dial has beautifully polished, sharp broad arrow hands, and a glorious thick chronograph seconds hand. The hour and minute hands share the same creamy faux patina as the batons. I'll throw in a loom shot here, and you can see that the batons on the dial pale significantly compared to the handset. A rather poor show for Swiss Superluminova. The original Chronomaster was powered by a Valjoux 92 movement, which was updated over time with the 7733, the 23, the 234, the 7765 and the 7755, depending on whether you preferred an automatic or hand-wind only version. Later versions utilised Ebauché movements, a brand that became ETA. The calibre within the new Chronomaster is a Sellita SW510, a 4 Hz automatic movement with 23 joules that hacks and handwinds and beats at 28,800 beats an hour, or 8 ticks a second. As well as having a cam-operated chronograph function, it has small seconds and a 30-minute timer. Their use will no doubt have an effect on the stated 48-hour power reserve. I couldn't find an accuracy rating for the Sellita, but this one is running at plus 6 seconds per day. Something else the SW510 has, which isn't visible on the dial, is a quickset date complication, which would explain the ghost position on the crown. So why have Nivada opted for a date complication? Well, I guess that comes down to cost saving and stock management. The Chronomaster comes in various iterations, one of which has a date complication. Rather than a relaunch brand getting bogged down with multiple calibers, it makes much more sense to use one movement and live with a ghost crown position. Even my Omega Railmaster has a hidden date complication. The rear of the case is fitted with a screw-down diver-style case back. At its centre is an engraved Nivada name and the shield logo, also the run number of your watch. Around its perimeter we have some specs denoting that the watch is stainless steel and utilises the Inca block system, all fairly standard stuff. Then, just when you least expect it, Swiss made. Why isn't that on the dial? Nivada have truly mastered the art of subtlety. Moving on, 10 atmospheres, pardon? The original Chronomaster, nearly 50 years ago, had 200 metres of water resistance. Nivada Grenchen went out of their way to make some hardcore deep dive watches, and yet this rather faithful reproduction only has 100 metres of water resistance. Has the Chronomaster fallen short on its tool watch credentials? The Chronomaster range comes with a choice of 8 straps and bracelets. If leather or rubber is your thing, then they have you covered. I'm a big fan of bracelets and opted for the beads of rice. The beads of rice is a solid stainless steel construction that starts at 20mm at the lugs and tapers moderately to 18mm at the press clasp, which jumps back out to 20.2mm. The clasp itself has a simple fold-over safety catch engraved with the Nivada shield, which releases to reveal a milled deployant. The quality of the bracelet is pretty decent. Brushed outer links protect the inner highly polished beads of rice. It's a silky smooth and comfortable bracelet, which shows some cost cutting as the links are held together with push pins. I would have expected screws at this price point. There are no half links, but 4 holes of micro adjustment allow for an accurate fit. The bracelet has fitted male end links, which appear to be solid. I haven't been able to confirm this as I've chosen to leave them in place. The watch is a loaner and I don't want to risk mangling the lugs. Now I can forgive the use of push pins, but not the male end links, as they easily add another 6mm to the watch's length. In a world where Seiko can make a big watch wear small, Nivada have made a small watch wear big. This is where I'm quite fortunate to be in the 7-inch wrist brigade, as the overall dimensions of the Chronomaster are a perfect fit. Even big boys that prefer a 42mm watch will be happy how this sits on the wrist. Those with more diminutive wrists should consider a strap option. The automatic Chronomaster Aviator Sea Diver starts at 1,755 Swiss francs. That's $1,942 or €1,720. Strangely, they don't have a price in sterling on their website, but I did the maths and it comes in at a little over £1,400. This bracelet version is 1,940 Swiss francs, a little over £1,550. If you're not a fan of faux patina, the Chronomaster Broad Arrow is also available with fresh white Swiss Superluminova. Or you can change the look completely with the Chrono King, that's the aforementioned date variant. There's also the Lollipop or the White Lollipop, the Orange Boy with what looks like a cheese wedge chronograph, or the White Orange Boy, or the Orange Boy with a special logo and grey subdials. You could throw caution to the wind and go for the White Dial Panda. If you're old school and don't mind winding your watch, then you can shave a couple of millimeters off your case thickness and save yourself some cash by opting for the manual version of your preferred variant. Prices start at 1,570 Swiss francs. If you're looking for something truly special and have the cash to splash, then you may want to consider one of the limited edition Chronomaster Valjoux variants. Actually, you can scrub that, as the Paul Newman Panda and the Reverse Panda variants are already sold out. The Big Eye is your only option. Your 4,900 Swiss francs gets you a slimmer case and a vintage restored Valjoux 23 VZ movement. The Chronomaster was delivered in an outer cardboard box with a cardboard sleeve protecting a leatherette style casket. Within you will find your plastic clad watch displayed on a velvet effect cushion. All of Nivada Grenchen watches come with a 30-day returns policy and a 2-year guarantee. You may have already guessed, I'm a big fan of the Chronomaster. I would happily choose it over the Omega Speedmaster, but rather than give you a gusher review, I've gone out of my way to highlight its minor failings. Its reduced water resistance, tachometer legibility, ghost crown position, weak loom, and the extended male end links, but none of these are a deal breaker for what I think is a gorgeous modern day reissue of a 1960s classic. The loom and end links are a quick fix, and the 100 meter water resistance is more than adequate for everyday use, unless of course you're a deep sea diver. The proportions make it very wearable, especially when you consider its rivals in this price bracket from the likes of Oris, Hanhart, Christopher Ward and Farah are all much bigger watches. So why have I given a watch that I like so much such a hard time? Well, it's all about finances. I need to replace my gas boiler. Buying the Nivada would take up half of that budget, and I think asking the wife to wear thick jumpers around the house would end up with me living in the garage. I have literally had to talk myself out of buying the Chronomaster, and it wasn't an easy job. Feel free to share your thoughts on the Chronomaster Aviator Sea Diver in the comments below. Do you think Nivada Grenchen did a good job with the reinterpretation and pricing? Are you a happy owner or planning on picking one up? I'll add a link to the Nivada Grenchen website in the video description below. If you enjoyed today's review, then please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.